The silence was deafening, not the peaceful quiet of Christmas morning that families cherish, but the kind of silence that screams danger in a Navy SEAL's ears. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, countless missions where split-second decisions meant life or death. But nothing had prepared her for this moment, standing in her childhood home, weapon drawn, knowing that the next few seconds would either save her family or destroy everything she held dear. Christmas Eve 2019 was supposed to be different. After years of missed holidays, canceled leave, and phone calls from halfway around the world, Sarah was finally home. The tree lights twinkled innocently in the corner. Presents wrapped in cheerful paper waited beneath, and the smell of her mother's famous sugar cookies filled the air. It should have been perfect, but perfection shattered at 11:47 p.m. when she heard the sound that every trained operator knows too well, the deliberate, careful footsteps of someone who didn't belong, someone who was trying very hard not to be heard. What happened next would test every skill Sarah had learned in the world's most elite fighting force. But this wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. This was home. And sometimes the most dangerous battles happen in the places where you should feel safest. Sarah Mitchell stepped off the plane at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation weighing on her chest. The familiar sounds of home, people speaking English without accents she had to strain to understand, children laughing instead of crying in fear felt almost foreign after 18 months in the mountains of Afghanistan. She was 32 years old, a decorated Navy SEAL who had earned her place in the most exclusive military unit in the world through sheer determination and an unwillingness to quit that bordered on stubborn. Her blonde hair was pulled back in the regulation bun that had become second nature, and despite being out of uniform, she moved with the measured, alert pace that marked her as someone who had seen combat. The airport was decorated for Christmas, with garland wrapped around pillars and cheerful music playing through speakers. Families reunited at baggage claim, children ran excitedly between their parents' legs, and everywhere Sarah looked, she saw the kind of normalcy that she had spent the better part of a decade protecting from halfway around the world. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Flight landed yet? Dad's making his famous eggnog, and I've got your room ready. Can't wait to see you, sweetheart." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile that had crossed her face in months. Home. After 3 tours of duty, countless missions she couldn't talk about, and memories that would probably never fully fade, she was finally going home for Christmas. The drive from Minneapolis to the small town of Stillwater took 45 minutes, but Sarah found herself taking the long way. She wasn't quite ready to be the daughter again after being the operator for so long. The snow-covered Minnesota countryside rolled by outside her rental car window, peaceful and white and completely untouched by the chaos she had left behind in Afghanistan. Stillwater was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement was usually the high school football team making it to state championships. Sarah had grown up here, played soccer in the park that was now decorated with Christmas lights, worked her first job at the hardware store that still displayed the same faded "Support Our Troops" banner in its window. She pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, just as the sun was setting on December 23rd. The 2-story house looked exactly the same as it had when she left for the Naval Academy 15 years ago. White siding, green shutters, and a front porch where her father still kept his collection of carved wooden ducks. Before she could even turn off the engine, the front door burst open and her parents rushed out. Her mother, Linda, was still wiping flour from her hands on her apron, and her father, Tom, moved with the careful gait of someone whose knees had been bothering him more than he wanted to admit. "Sarah!" Linda's voice cracked with emotion as she pulled her daughter into a hug that seemed to last forever. "You're so thin and tan. Are you eating enough?" "Of course you're not eating enough." Tom waited his turn, then wrapped both women in a bear hug that lifted Sarah's feet off the ground despite his 68 years. "Welcome home, kid," he said simply, but Sarah could hear the pride and relief in his voice. They spent the evening catching up in the living room, the Christmas tree casting a warm glow over the familiar furniture. Sarah found herself editing her stories, leaving out the parts that would keep her parents awake at night. She talked about the Afghan children she had helped evacuate from a school that was being threatened by Taliban forces, but she didn't mention the firefight that had lasted 6 hours, or the teammate she had carried to safety with a bullet in his leg. She told them about the village elder who had invited her squad to share tea and bread, but she didn't describe the IED that had exploded 50 meters away while they were walking back to base, or how she had spent the next 2 hours checking and rechecking her equipment because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You look tired, sweetheart," Linda said around 10 o'clock, studying her daughter's face with the penetrating gaze that only mothers possess. "Why don't you get some rest? Christmas Eve is tomorrow, and your brother's family will be here with the kids." Sarah nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion that she had been pushing aside for months. Her old room was exactly as she had left it: soccer trophies on the dresser, a faded poster of Navy ships on the wall, and the twin bed that now seemed impossibly small after years of sleeping on military cots and in tents. She unpacked her duffel bag with the methodical precision that had been drilled into her during training. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. Even on leave, even at home, some habits were too deeply ingrained to break. But as she prepared for bed, Sarah found herself doing something she hadn't done in her parents' house since she was a teenager. She checked the locks on all the windows. She noted the sight lines from the street to the house. She made mental notes of every possible entry point and every piece of furniture that could provide cover if needed. It wasn't paranoia, it was training. After years of operating in hostile territory, the hypervigilance that had kept her alive overseas didn't simply switch off because she was back in Minnesota. Her instructors at Bud/S had taught her that there were no off switches for a SEAL, only varying degrees of readiness. She lay in bed for hours, listening to the house settle around her. The familiar creaks and sighs of the old wooden frame should have been comforting, but instead, every sound made her more alert. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rumble of a snowplow working through the night. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and filled with dreams that mixed the mountains of Afghanistan with the forests of Minnesota. She woke several times, automatically reaching for the sidearm that wasn't there before, remembering where she was. Christmas Eve dawned bright and cold, with fresh snow covering the ground like a pristine white blanket. Sarah woke early, as she always did, and found her father already in the kitchen, coffee brewing and morning news playing quietly on the small TV on the counter. "Couldn't sleep either?" Tom asked, looking up from his newspaper. Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him at the kitchen table where she had eaten breakfast every morning before school for 12 years. "Takes a while to adjust," she admitted. Tom nodded, understanding without needing details. He had served in Vietnam, though he rarely talked about it. There was a kinship between veterans that didn't require words, a shared understanding of what it meant to see the world differently after experiencing combat. "Your mom's been planning this Christmas for months," Tom said quietly. "She's so excited to have everyone together. Your brother Jim is driving up from Des Moines with Kelly and the kids. Should be quite a houseful." Sarah smiled, genuinely looking forward to seeing her older brother and meeting her 2-year-old nephew for the first time. Family had become even more important to her after spending so much time away from it. The morning passed quickly as Linda threw herself into Christmas Eve preparations with the enthusiasm of someone making up for years of holidays celebrated without her youngest child. The house filled with the smells of baking sugar cookies, pumpkin bread, and the beginnings of Christmas dinner that would need to be started early. Jim's family arrived around noon, and the house suddenly felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. 2-year-old Connor toddled around the living room, fascinated by the Christmas tree lights, while his 4-year-old sister Emma peppered Sarah with questions about being a soldier. "Are you really in the Navy?" Emma asked, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. "I am," Sarah confirmed, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "But you're not on a boat." "No, I'm not on a boat. I do different kinds of missions." "Like fighting bad guys?" Sarah glanced up at Jim, who shrugged with the universal expression of a parent who had given up trying to control what his children said. "Sometimes," Sarah answered honestly, "but mostly I help keep good people safe." Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation and wandered off to investigate the presents under the tree. But Sarah caught the grateful look that Jim's wife Kelly gave her. Not everyone knew how to talk to children about military service without either glorifying war or diminishing the importance of what soldiers did. The afternoon flew by in a blur of family activities. They played board games, watched Christmas movies, and shared stories that grew more embellished with each telling. Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in months, letting her guard down in the warmth of her family's love. As evening approached, they attended Christmas Eve service at the small Lutheran church where Sarah had been confirmed. The sanctuary was decorated with poinsettias and candles, and the familiar hymns brought back memories of Christmas Eves from her childhood. Sitting in the pew between her parents, Connor sleeping on her lap, Sarah felt a sense of peace that had been elusive for longer than she cared to admit. This was what she had been fighting for. Not just the abstract concept of freedom, but this specific moment, this particular family, this small church in this quiet town where people could gather to celebrate without fear. The service ended with everyone holding candles and singing Silent Night, and Sarah had to blink back tears as the voices rose around her. Some battles were fought with weapons and tactics, but others were fought simply by being present, by showing up for the people who mattered most. They returned home around 9 o'clock, the children tired and cranky but still excited about Christmas morning. Kelly and Jim got the kids settled in the guest room, while Linda and Tom puttered around the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner and setting out cookies for Santa, a tradition they had maintained even when their children were adults. Sarah helped with the dishes, grateful for the mundane normalcy of the task. As she dried plates and put them away in the cabinets where they had always belonged, she felt more grounded than she had in years. "Thank you," she said to her mother as they finished up. "For what?" "For keeping everything the same. For making this feel like home." Linda smiled and hugged her daughter tightly. "You'll always have a home here, Sarah. No matter where the Navy sends you or how long you're gone, this will always be here." By 11 o'clock, the house had settled into the peaceful quiet of Christmas Eve. Jim's family was asleep in the guest room. Tom was dozing in his recliner while watching late-night television. And Linda was in the kitchen, making one final check on Christmas dinner preparations. Sarah sat on the couch, watching the lights on the Christmas tree and listening to the comfortable sounds of her family's home. For the first time in 18 months, she felt completely safe. There were no mortars to worry about, no perimeter to secure, no mission briefings to attend in the morning. Just family, peace, and the promise of Christmas morning. She was beginning to understand what her father meant when he said that the best part of coming home wasn't the place, but the feeling that you could finally stop watching your back. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and for the first time in years, Sarah Mitchell was exactly where she belonged. Sarah jerked awake at 11:47 p.m., her internal clock as precise as any timepiece. Years of military training had conditioned her body to wake at specific intervals, and even on leave, even in the safety of her childhood bedroom, some habits remained unbreakable. But this wasn't a routine awakening. Something had pulled her from sleep, a sound that didn't belong in the familiar symphony of her parents' house. She lay perfectly still, controlling her breathing, and listened. There it was again. The soft creak of a floorboard from somewhere downstairs, followed by the barely audible whisper of fabric against wood. Someone was moving through the house, and they were trying very hard not to be heard. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. Her heart rate remained steady as she silently rolled out of bed and moved to her duffel bag. Buried beneath civilian clothes was her service weapon, a Sig Sauer P226 that had been her companion through 3 tours of duty. She had hoped never to need it in Stillwater, Minnesota, but hope wasn't a tactical plan. The weapon felt familiar and reassuring in her hands as she performed a quick function check in the darkness. Loaded, safety off, ready to fire. She moved to her bedroom door and eased it open just enough to peer into the hallway. The house was dark except for the soft glow from the Christmas tree lights downstairs. She could hear her father's steady breathing from her parents' bedroom, the occasional murmur from one of the children in the guest room, and underneath it all, the careful movements of someone who didn't belong. Sarah's mind automatically shifted into mission mode. Assess the threat, protect the civilians, neutralize the danger. Her family wasn't a squad of trained operators. They were soft targets who wouldn't even know they were in danger until it was too late. She moved down the hallway like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Years of operating in hostile environments had taught her how to move through unfamiliar terrain without making a sound, and her childhood home might as well have been mapped in her DNA. At the top of the stairs, she paused and listened again. The intruder was in the living room, near the Christmas tree. She could hear the faint rustle of paper and the soft clink of metal against glass. They were searching for something, moving carefully through the presents and decorations. Sarah's tactical mind considered the possibilities. Burglary was the most likely scenario. Someone who had watched the house, knew the family was home for Christmas, and assumed they would be carrying cash and gifts worth stealing. But there were other possibilities, darker ones that her experience in military intelligence made her consider. Had someone discovered her identity? SEALs weren't supposed to be public figures, but operational security wasn't always perfect. There were people in the world who would consider a Navy SEAL's family a high-value target, especially one who had spent time in Afghanistan. She pushed the paranoid thoughts aside and focused on what she could observe. One person, moving carefully but not professionally. A burglar, most likely. Someone who had picked the wrong house on the wrong night. Sarah began moving down the stairs, each step planned and deliberate. The old wooden steps knew where to place her feet to avoid creaks, muscle memory from teenage years of sneaking back into the house after curfew. But this was different. This time, someone's life might depend on her. Silence. Halfway down the stairs, she could see into the living room. A figure dressed in dark clothing was kneeling beside the Christmas tree, going through the presents with a small flashlight. Average height, medium build, wearing a ski mask and gloves. Professional enough to avoid leaving fingerprints, but amateur in execution. Sarah reached the bottom of the stairs and paused behind the wall that separated the staircase from the living room. She was close enough now to hear the intruder's breathing, slightly elevated from adrenaline, but controlled. Close enough to smell cigarette smoke on their clothing and the faint chemical odor of methamphetamine. A drug addict looking for easy cash to fund their next fix. Dangerous because they were unpredictable, but not the trained assassin that her paranoid military mind had briefly considered. She steadied her weapon and stepped around the corner. "Stop moving and put your hands where I can see them," she commanded, her voice low and absolutely authoritative. The figure froze, flashlight still in hand, halfway through opening what looked like one of the gift boxes that held her nephew's toys. "I said hands where I can see them. Now." Slowly, the intruder raised both hands, the flashlight creating crazy shadows on the ceiling. Sarah could see the person's eyes through the holes in the ski mask, wide with surprise and the telltale dilation of someone under the influence of stimulants. "Turn around slowly and face me." The intruder complied, and Sarah found herself looking at a young man, probably early 20s, with the gaunt appearance and nervous energy of someone deep in the grip of addiction. His clothes were too big for his diminished frame, and his hands shook slightly even with his arms raised. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking with desperation. "I just need money. I wasn't going to hurt anyone." Sarah kept her weapon trained on him, her stance steady and professional. She had been in much more dangerous situations than this, but there was something about protecting her family's home that made every detail feel hypercharged with importance. "How did you get in?" "Back door." "The lock was old." "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." She could hear the genuine remorse in his voice, but apologies didn't change the fact that he had broken into her parents' house on Christmas Eve. Apologies didn't change the fact that her 2-year-old nephew was sleeping upstairs, or that her parents had been violated in their own home. "What's your name?" "Tyler." "Tyler Morrison." The name was familiar, and after a moment, Sarah placed it. Tyler Morrison had been 3 years behind her in high school, a quiet kid from a troubled family who had played JV basketball before dropping out his junior year. She remembered him as polite and shy, nothing like the desperate young man standing in her parents' living room. "I know you, Tyler. You went to Stillwater High." His eyes widened behind the mask. "You're Sarah Mitchell, Tom and Linda's daughter. You're supposed to be in the military." "I am in the military. And right now you're going to explain why you broke into my parents' house on Christmas Eve." Tyler's shoulders sagged with defeat. "I owe money. Bad money. To bad people. They said if I didn't pay by Christmas Day, they'd hurt my little sister. She's only 16. She doesn't have anything to do with this." Sarah kept her weapon steady, but she could hear the truth in his voice. She had interrogated enough people to recognize genuine fear and desperation when she heard it. "How much do you owe?" $2,000. "And you thought you'd find that much cash in a school teacher's house?" "I thought maybe Christmas presents, electronics I could sell." I wasn't thinking straight. I know it was stupid. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made both of them freeze. Sarah's father appeared at the bottom of the staircase, wearing his old bathrobe and slippers, moving with the careful alertness of someone who had heard voices where there shouldn't be any. "Sarah? What's going on?" "Dad, go back upstairs. Everything's under control. But Tom Mitchell hadn't raised a Navy SEAL by being someone who backed down from confrontation. He took in the scene, his daughter holding a weapon on a masked intruder in their living room, and his expression hardened with protective anger. Who is this? What does he want? Tyler Morrison. He broke in looking for things to steal. Tom's anger shifted to something more complicated when he heard the name. Like his daughter, he remembered the Morrison family. The father who had struggled with alcoholism. The mother who had worked 3 jobs trying to keep the family afloat. And the kids who had gotten lost in the chaos. Take off the mask, son, Tom said quietly. Tyler looked at Sarah, who nodded permission. He pulled off the ski mask, revealing a face that looked much older than his 26 years. His cheeks were hollow, his skin pale and marked with the sores that came from chronic drug use. Tom studied the young man for a long moment. You're Kevin Morrison's boy. Yes, sir. Your dad was a good man when he wasn't drinking. Helped me fix my roof one summer, wouldn't take a penny for it. He died 3 years ago. Liver failure. Tom nodded sadly. I heard. I'm sorry for your loss. The conversation felt surreal to Sarah. Here was her father, expressing condolences to the man who had just broken into their house, while she held a weapon on him in their Christmas-decorated living room. Dad, we need to call the police. Sarah, wait. Tom stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Tyler's face. What's this about money you owe? Tyler repeated his story about the debt and the threats against his sister, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. Tom listened without interruption, and Sarah could see him processing not just the words, but the fear behind them. Where's your sister now? Tom asked. At home. Our mom's working the night shift at the hospital. She doesn't know about any of this. Tom looked at his daughter, and Sarah could see him making a decision that she wasn't going to like. Sarah, lower your weapon. Dad, he broke into our house. He's a sick kid who made a bad choice trying to protect his sister. That's not the same thing as being a criminal. Sarah kept her pistol trained on Tyler, but she could feel the authority in her father's voice. This was his house, his decision to make. Please, Tyler said, looking between father and daughter. Just call the cops. I'll go to jail, but maybe that'll buy my sister some time to get out of town or something. How do you know these people who threatened you? Sarah asked. I've been buying from them for 2 years. Started with pills after I hurt my back at the warehouse job. And pills got expensive, so I switched to meth. It's cheaper. Sarah had heard this story before, in different forms, from other young people in other places. The prescription drug epidemic that had led to harder drugs. The cycle of addiction and debt that destroyed families and communities. Who are they? Guys from Minneapolis. They come through Stillwater every few weeks, sell to the regulars. I missed my last payment, and they said I had until Christmas Day to come up with the money plus interest. Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying Tyler with the expression he used when he was working through a complicated problem. Sarah recognized the look. Her father had always been someone who solved problems rather than just complaining about them. Sarah, put the gun away. Dad, put it away. Please. Against her better judgment, Sarah lowered her weapon and engaged the safety. Tyler remained motionless, hands still raised, as if he didn't trust this sudden change in circumstances. Tyler, Tom said quietly, I want you to go into the kitchen and sit at the table. Don't touch anything, don't move around. Just sit there while my daughter and I talk. Tyler nodded and moved carefully toward the kitchen, giving Sarah a wide berth. She watched him go, every instinct telling her that this was a mistake. When Tyler was out of earshot, Tom turned to his daughter. I know what you're thinking. Do you? Because I'm thinking that there's a drug addict in our kitchen who broke into our house on Christmas Eve, and you're treating him like a guest who showed up for dinner. I'm treating him like someone's son who made a bad decision. A really bad decision that could have gotten someone hurt. Tom nodded. You're right, but he didn't hurt anyone, and he's not going to. Look at him, Sarah. He's scared, he's sick, and he's desperate. But he's not violent. Sarah wanted to argue, but she had to admit that her father was right. Tyler Morrison was a threat, but not in the way that demanded a military response. He was a threat the way a wounded animal was a threat. Dangerous because he was cornered, not because he was malicious. What are you thinking, Dad? I'm thinking about your brother when he was 22 and wrapped his car around a tree because he'd been drinking. I'm thinking about how lucky we were that he only hurt himself, and how differently things could have gone. Sarah remembered that night, the phone call from the hospital, the long drive to Minneapolis, the hours of waiting to see if Jim would walk again. He had been lucky. Tyler Morrison apparently hadn't been.
That's different. Is it?
Jim made a bad choice that could have killed someone. Tyler made a bad choice that could have gotten him killed. The only difference is that Jim had a family who could afford to help him get back on his feet. From the kitchen came the sound of quiet sobbing. Tyler Morrison was crying, probably from relief that he wasn't dead or under arrest, probably from shame at what he had been reduced to doing. "What do you want to do, Dad?" Tom was quiet for a moment, looking toward the kitchen where Tyler sat. "I want to solve the problem. By giving him money? By giving him a chance to solve the problem himself." Sarah stared at her father, recognizing the same stubborn compassion that had driven him to coach Little League for 15 years and volunteer at the food pantry every Saturday morning. Tom Mitchell didn't just see problems, he saw people who needed help. "This is crazy." "Maybe, but it's Christmas Eve, and I'm not sending someone's child to jail or leaving him to get beaten up by drug dealers if there's another option." The house was quiet around them, except for the soft sounds from the kitchen. Upstairs, the rest of the family slept peacefully, unaware of the drama playing out below. The Christmas tree lights continued to twinkle cheerfully, casting warm colors across a scene that felt anything but festive. Sarah looked at her father and saw something that reminded her why she had joined the military in the first place. Not for the glory or the adventure, but to protect people like him. People who still believed that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was complicated and risky. "Okay," she said finally. "What's your plan?" Tom Mitchell sat across from Tyler Morrison at the kitchen table where he had eaten breakfast with his family for 35 years, and Sarah realized she was watching her father do what he did best, turn a crisis into an opportunity to help someone. "Tell me about these dealers," Tom said quietly. Tyler wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and took a shaky breath. "There's 3 of them. They drive up from Minneapolis every other week, sell to maybe 15 or 20 people around town. They're not from any big organization or anything, just guys trying to make money." "Names? I only know first names. Marcus, Joey, and Damon. Marcus is the one who does the talking." Sarah leaned against the kitchen counter, her weapon now holstered but still accessible. Her tactical mind was automatically cataloging information. 3 suspects, no permanent local presence, operating on a predictable schedule. "Where do they meet you?" "Different places. Sometimes the old Kmart parking lot, sometimes down by the river. They text me when they're coming to town." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "When are you supposed to pay them?" "Tomorrow. Christmas Day. They said they'd be in town around noon to collect from everyone who owes money. And if you don't pay..." Tyler's hands shook as he answered. "They said they'd hurt my sister first, then me. Make an example so other people wouldn't think they could skip payments." Sarah had dealt with enough criminals in her military career to know that Tyler was probably telling the truth. Small-time dealers relied on fear and reputation to maintain control over their customer base. They would absolutely follow through on threats if it served their business interests. "Tyler," Tom said, "I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you ready to get clean?" "What?" "Are you ready to stop using drugs? Ready to go to treatment? Do the work? Change your life?" Tyler stared at him as if the question didn't make sense. I don't know. I've tried before. I can't afford treatment." "That's not what I asked. I asked if you're ready to get clean." Sarah watched the exchange with growing understanding of what her father was planning. This wasn't just about solving the immediate problem of Tyler's debt. This was about solving the larger problem that had created the debt in the first place. Tyler was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm tired. I'm so tired of being scared all the time. Of lying to my mom and my sister. Of doing things like this." He gestured around the kitchen. "I don't want to be this person anymore." Tom nodded. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Sarah listened as her father outlined a plan that was simultaneously compassionate and practical. Tom would loan Tyler the $2,000 to pay his debt, with the understanding that Tyler would immediately check himself into a treatment program that Tom would help him research and afford. "But here's the deal," Tom said firmly. This isn't charity. It's an investment. You're going to pay me back every penny, but you're going to do it with money you earn from legitimate work, and you're going to do it after you get clean. Mr. Mitchell, I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking. I'm offering. But there are conditions. Tom's conditions were specific and non-negotiable. Tyler would surrender his phone so Tom could contact the dealers and arrange the payment meeting. Tyler would call his mother and sister before Christmas dinner and tell them everything about the addiction, the debt, and the treatment plan. And Tyler would check himself into the treatment facility the day after Christmas, with no excuses and no delays. What if I relapse? Tyler asked. What if I take your money and mess up again? Then you mess up, but you'll mess up as someone who had a chance, not as someone who never got one. Sarah found herself both amazed and frustrated by her father's approach. The military had trained her to eliminate threats efficiently and move on to the next mission. But Tom Mitchell was treating this broken young man as a problem to be solved rather than a threat to be neutralized. "Dad," Sarah said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped into the hallway, leaving Tyler alone at the kitchen table. "You know this could all go wrong," Sarah said. "He could take the money and disappear. He could pay the dealers and then go right back to using. He could be lying about the threats to his sister. Yes, he could do any of those things. So why take the risk?" Tom looked at his daughter with the patient expression he had worn when she was 12 and asking why she had to do chores when her friends didn't, because someone took a risk on you once. What? When you were 17 and wanted to go to the Naval Academy. Your grades were good but not perfect. Your SAT scores were solid but not outstanding. You were a good athlete but not a great one. The Academy could have picked someone with better qualifications. Sarah frowned, not understanding where her father was going with this. But someone looked at your application and saw potential instead of just statistics. Someone took a chance on a middle-class kid from a small Minnesota town and gave you the opportunity to become something extraordinary. That's different. Is it? Tyler Morrison was a good kid once, too. Honor roll student, never missed church, helped his neighbors shovel snow without being asked. He's not fundamentally different from you. He just had worse luck and made worse choices. Sarah wanted to argue, but she could see the truth in her father's words. The line between success and failure, between opportunity and disaster, was often thinner than people wanted to admit. Besides, Tom added with a slight smile, "I've got a Navy SEAL for a daughter. If Tyler tries to rip us off, I figure you can track him down and convince him to reconsider." Despite everything, Sarah found herself laughing. "That's your backup plan? Sending me after a drug addict? That's my backup plan." They returned to the kitchen, where Tyler was sitting exactly where they had left him, staring at his hands and probably contemplating how completely his life had changed in the last 30 minutes. "Tyler," Tom said, sitting back down at the table. "Do we have a deal?" Tyler looked up, his eyes filled with something that might have been hope. "Yes, sir. We have a deal." "Good. Now I need your phone so I can contact these dealers." Tyler handed over a battered smartphone, and Tom scrolled through the text messages until he found the most recent communication from someone named Marcus. "Sarah, I need you to help me compose a message." Sarah read over her father's shoulder as they crafted a text that would arrange a meeting for Christmas Day. The message was simple and direct. Tyler had the money and wanted to pay his debt and end his business with them permanently. The response came within minutes. Kmart parking lot. 12:30 p.m. Bring cash. "Are you seriously planning to go to this meeting yourself?" Sarah asked. "I'm planning to make sure Tyler can pay his debt and move on with his life." "Dad, these are drug dealers. They're not going to be happy about losing a customer." "Then it's a good thing I'll have backup." Sarah stared at her father. "You want me to come with you? I want you to make sure nothing goes wrong." Tyler looked between them with growing alarm. "Mr. Patsis, Mitchell, these guys are dangerous. You don't understand what they're capable of." "No," Tom said calmly. "You don't understand what my daughter is capable of." The next few hours passed in a strange mixture of Christmas preparation and mission planning. Linda woke up around 7 a.m. and found Tyler asleep on the living room couch, covered with one of her quilts. Tom explained the situation in the careful, measured way he used when he needed his wife to trust his judgment, even when it seemed questionable. To Sarah's surprise, her mother's reaction was remarkably similar to her father's. That poor boy, Linda said, looking at Tyler's sleeping form. His mother must be worried sick. He's going to call her this morning, Tom assured her. Good, and he'll stay for Christmas dinner. A person shouldn't be alone on Christmas Day, especially when they're trying to turn their life around. Jim's reaction when he woke up and learned what had happened was less charitable but ultimately supportive. You're both crazy, he told his father and sister, but if you're determined to do this, at least do it smart. They spent the morning planning the exchange like a military operation, which Sarah supposed it was. They would arrive early to scout the location and identify potential problems. Sarah would position herself with a clear view of the meeting site but far enough away to avoid escalating the situation unless necessary. Tom would handle the exchange itself, with Tyler staying in the car. Why do you want to be the one who talks to them? Sarah asked her father as they reviewed the plan one final time. Because I'm a 68-year-old retired teacher, which makes me about as non-threatening as possible. You're a Navy SEAL, which makes you exactly as threatening as possible. At noon on Christmas Day, they drove to the abandoned Kmart parking lot in Tom's pickup truck. The lot was mostly empty except for a few cars that belonged to employees of the chain restaurant next door. Snow covered the cracked asphalt, and the wind carried the smell of exhaust and cold air. Sarah positioned herself near the restaurant, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough away to avoid being noticed. She wore civilian clothes and a baseball cap, and to anyone watching, she looked like someone waiting for a ride. At 12:30 exactly, a blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. 3 men got out, all in their 20s or early 30s, wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that suggested their drug business was profitable. Tom got out of his truck and walked toward them, carrying a plain envelope. Tyler remained in the passenger seat, slumped down to avoid being seen clearly. Sarah watched through the scope of the rifle she had retrieved from her gear bag, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. At this distance, she could take down all 3 men before they could react if they posed any threat to her father. The conversation was brief and businesslike. Tom handed over the envelope. One of the dealers counted the money quickly and they talked for maybe 30 seconds. Then the dealers got back in their car and drove away. Tom returned to the truck and they drove home in silence. It wasn't until they were back in the driveway that Tyler finally spoke. That's it? It's over? It's over, Tom confirmed. You don't owe them anything, and they have no reason to bother you or your sister. Tyler started crying again, but this time it was relief rather than despair. Christmas dinner was unlike any the Mitchell family had ever experienced. Tyler had called his mother and sister earlier that morning, and the conversations had been difficult but honest. His mother was driving up from the hospital to join them, and his sister was coming too, curious to meet the family that had helped her brother. The meal itself was perfect. Linda's famous turkey, homemade stuffing, and all the traditional sides that marked Christmas dinner in the Mitchell house. But the conversation was extraordinary. Tyler talked about his plans for treatment, his hopes for getting clean, and his gratitude for the second chance he had been given. Tom and Linda asked thoughtful questions and offered encouragement. Jim and Kelly shared stories about their own struggles and victories, making Tyler feel like part of the family rather than a charity case. Sarah watched it all with wonder, recognizing that she was witnessing something that would never be covered in any military manual. This was what winning actually looked like, not defeating an enemy, but transforming them into an ally. Tyler's mother arrived just as they were serving dessert, and the reunion was emotional and hopeful. Patricia Morrison was a tired woman who had been carrying too much weight for too long, but when she saw her son clean and sober and surrounded by people who cared about his future, some of that weight seemed to lift. I don't know how to thank you, she told Tom and Linda. You don't need to thank us, Linda replied. Just help him stay strong. Late that evening, after Tyler and his family had gone home and the rest of the Mitchells had settled into the comfortable aftermath of Christmas Day, Sarah found herself alone with her father in the living room. You know, she said, in all my training, no one ever taught me how to handle a situation like this. What situation? Someone who needed help instead of elimination, Tom smiled. Maybe that's because not every problem requires a military solution, but some do. Yes, some do. And when they do, I'm glad you're the one handling them. But this wasn't one of those problems. Sarah nodded, understanding. Tyler's going to make it, isn't he? I think he has a chance. A real chance. And if he doesn't, Then at least he'll know that someone believed he was worth saving. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights on the Christmas tree and listening to the peaceful sounds of their family home. Outside, snow continued to fall on the quiet streets of Stillwater, covering the world in clean white possibility. Sarah thought about the young man who had broken into their house looking for money to pay drug dealers, and who was now going to sleep in his own bed, clean and sober and hopeful for the first time in years. She thought about her father, who had seen past the immediate threat to the human being underneath, and who had chosen compassion over caution. And she thought about herself, the trained warrior, who had learned something new about what it meant to fight for something worth protecting. The silence that had awakened her the night before had been broken not by gunfire or violence, but by the sound of lives changing for the better. It was the kind of victory that would never be recorded in any official report, never earn any medals or commendations. But it was real, and it mattered, and it was exactly the kind of thing worth coming home for. Christmas Day ended the way it should, with family, with hope, and with the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've made the world a little bit better than you found it. And for Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, daughter, and protector of the things that mattered most, it was the best Christmas gift she had ever received.